John.
Sean, there's a report this morning that you reached out directly to the CIA Director Pompeo. Did you directly contact Director Pompeo and ask him to knock down the New York Times story on the Russia connection?
Thanks, John. Let me, kind of, if I may, walk through the entire timeline. I think it's important. As I mentioned, I think a week ago, the New York Times published a story about what they called contacts between members of the Trump campaign and Russian officials. The FBI deputy director was at a meeting here at the White House that morning. After the meeting concluded, he asked the chief of staff to stand back a second. He wanted to tell him that the report in the New York Times was, quote, BS. For viewers at home, I think you can pretty much figure what that means, but I'll leave it at that. At that time, the chief of staff said, thank you for sharing that with me. Can we let other people know that the story is not accurate? Throughout the day, they went back and forth to see what they thought was appropriate. Finally came to the conclusion that they did not want to get in the process of knocking down every story that they had issues with. We then were informed that other people had come to the same conclusions, including that time Chairman Devin Nunes had told us, hey, I've been knocking this down, telling reporters. We shared a number with him of a reporter that had contacted us. And again, when the reporters contacted us and we said, no, that's not, to the best of our knowledge, it's not true, they were asking us, can you point to anybody else that can substantiate this? And I think we did a good job of saying, sure, we will share with reporters other people who have come to the same conclusion. So I won't go into the specifics. I will say that I think we did our job very effectively by making sure that reporters who had questions about the accuracy and the claims made in the New York Times, that we were pointing them to subject matter experts who understood whether or not that story was accurate or not. And I think just to continue to be very, very clear on this, it was about the accuracy of the reporting and the claims that were made in there, plain and simple, about whether or not a story that appeared in the New York Times was accurate. And individual after individual continued to say that they, as far as they knew, they weren't. I think most of you probably saw Chairman Nunes' comments this morning. He was very clear, number one, that he reached out to us to say, I've been telling people, reporters, that these allegations and descriptions in the New York Times are not accurate. And then we shared that information with him, but he came to us to share that he equally had that issue brought up to him. He was briefed and saw, quote, no evidence that the story was accurate. So the answer is, we have continued to give reporters information and sources that went to the accuracy or lack thereof of a report that was in a newspaper. And I think, I think Chairman Nunes also equally said it's interesting how we literally were engaging with the press, saying, if you have a question about the sourcing on this, obviously when brought to our attention, we said it's not accurate as far as we know. But then most of you and your colleagues who had inquired would say, well, that's great, I'm sure you're saying this, but who else can corroborate this? So our job was to continue to, when informed, share sources who had equally come to the same conclusion that the Times story was not accurate.
You don't think there's something strange about, or there's something odd about the White House press secretary getting the CIA director on the phone to knock down a story about an investigation?
No, but see, respectfully, you're using words like knock down. There was a story in a newspaper. Hold on. No. There was reporters coming to us saying there is a story out there. What's your take on it? And our answer was, we don't believe it's accurate. We don't believe it's false. But obviously, that's our take on it. And reporters were saying to us, well, is there anybody that you can point to substantiate this claim? Now, remember, this all started with the FBI coming to us, bringing it to our attention, saying that the story in the Times was not accurate. In fact, it was BS. And all we did was simply say, that's great. Could you tell other reporters the same thing you're telling us? And I would think that other reporters, yourself included, would think that that would be a helpful thing to get the story straight. All we sought to do was to actually get an accurate report out. And again, I think Chairman Nunes this morning, over and over and over and over again, made it very clear that no evidence that has been brought to his attention suggests that reporting was accurate. So, respectfully, I think it's interesting that I'm being asked what's appropriate when what we're doing is actually urging reporters to engage with subject matter experts who can corroborate whether or not something's accurate or not.
Should there be a special prosecutor? Darrell Issa has called for a special prosecutor to look into this.
Right, and I guess my question would be a special prosecutor for what?
Look into the Russia connection.
And here's my right. And I guess my
part of the campaign. I mean, Sessions was part of the campaign.
I understand, but here's my question, Jonathan. We have now for 6 months heard story after story come out about unnamed sources say the same thing over and over again, and nothing's come of it, right? We've heard the same people, the same anecdotes, and we've heard reports over and over again. And as Chairman Nunes very, very clear today, he has seen nothing that corroborates that. So at what point you've got to ask yourself, what are you investigating?
Well, Russian interference, I mean, beyond the
and I think that both the House and the Senate have looked at it. You know as well as I do that the intelligence community has looked at it as well. There's a big difference. I think that Russia's involvement and activity has been investigated up and down. So the question becomes at some point, if there's nothing to further investigate, what are you asking people to investigate? I mean, Chairman Nunes spoke very clearly today when asked over and over and over again about all of this and said that he has seen nothing that leads him to believe that there's there. The president has spoken forcefully time and time again that he has no interest in Russia. He hasn't talked to people in Russia in years. And yet you keep asking, and I say you collectively, to try to find something that seemingly at least the reporting that I'm seeing in different organizations suggests that there's nothing new that's being reported. It's the same stuff over and over again that we've heard for literally 6 months. And so the question becomes at some point, what do you need to further investigate if there is nothing that has come out?
Well, can you now categorically deny there were no contacts between the Russians and
I
anybody
can't
on the
deny.
campaign?
I can't. I guess my question is, I'm not right.
That's what the investigation would look at.
Right, and I guess my point is that you've had the intelligence community look at Russia's involvement in the election. You've had the House and the Senate both do the same. And so what I'm trying to ascertain is at what point, how many people have to say that there's nothing there before you realize there's nothing there? I can't say unequivocally. All I'm saying is the people who've done the investigating about Russia overall and its activities in the United States, specifically now with respect to our election, haven't provided anything that lead me to believe or should leave you to believe. And I continue to see reports coming from different media sources that are saying, when they checked in with law enforcement or intelligence community sources, there's nothing more than has been previously reported over and over again. So at some point, you do have to ask yourself, what are you actually looking for? How many times do you have to come to the same conclusion before you take the answer? And that's what Mara?
Sean, just to be clear, just to follow up on that, did you personally reach out to Pompeo?
I'm not going to discuss what we did internally. I'm just going to say that when we shared, we did our job about making sure that when reporters had questions, we let them know what subject matter experts were available to discuss the accuracy of a newspaper story. Mara?
Yeah, I'm sure